Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to this Deck Tech. It's me, Wildcard MTG, back with another one. I know I've been away for a little while and kind of want to explain what's been going on. Honestly, I've been a little dissuaded with Magic. You know, after the release of Spider-Man and Avatar, I just wasn't feeling in tune with the game. It wasn't. I wasn't feeling inspired to build decks from any of these sets. You know, Avatar was like power crept to oblivion. Nothing seemed interesting to me, so I just didn't do anything. And that's not really what this video is about. We're here to do some deck techs. I'm not crapping on UB. Obviously, this is a UB deck tech, so it's nothing like that. It's just those properties were not interesting to me. I feel the same way about Ninja Turtles coming up, and I love Ninja Turtles, but I have zero desire to build anything from those sets. But today we're going to go through one of my favorite decks that I have built pretty recently, and that is Aloy, Savior of Meridian. This deck is Golem, Construct, Kindred, and keeping with theme of the game, having Aloy kind of discover this hidden world and command an army of mechanical monsters. That's really kind of how I built this deck. So without further ado, let's get into it. So now let's jump in and look at Aloy and what she does. Aloy, Savior of Meridian, is 3 generic green-blue legendary creature human warrior with vigilance and reach, and she is a 3/5. Her ability is In You All Things Are Possible. Whenever one or more artifact creatures you control attack, discover X, where X is the greatest power among them. And Discover says, exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a non-land card with that mana value or less. Cast it without paying its mana cost, or put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom in a random order. Now, the slight upside of Discover, in my opinion, is that it matches the mana value or less. Unlike Cascade, which is always less than, but on top of that, it also gives you the option to put the card into your hand if you don't want to cast it. And now the distinction there is that it puts it into your hand, it is not a draw trigger. And also, much like Cascade, Discover lets you cast the spells. So when they go on the stack, there is a round of priority for players to respond to that spell. So Aloy has a lot of cool interactions if you have the right pieces and creatures out. This whole deck is built around cheating out massive artifact creatures and getting in for significant damage with them. We'll touch on some of these play patterns later in this video, but for now, let's start at the creatures. And these are just going to be the important creatures in the deck. I'm not going to go through every single one like I used to. Obviously, the entire deck list is in the show notes as usual. Before this, let's start off with our first creatures here. So we have Cybermen Patrol, Cybermen Squadron, Blightsteel Colossus, Kappa Cannoneer, Ovia Automech Artisan, Master Transmuter, Karn Legacy Reforged. And so these are like the first little bit of important creatures here. Let's look at our Cybermen pair here. So first up, Cybermen Squadron. It's 7 mana value. Artifact creature Cybermen 5/5. It says non-legendary artifact creatures you control have Myriad. And Myriad is whenever a creature with Myriad attacks, for each opponent other than the defending player, you may create a token that's a copy of that creature that's tapped and attacking that player or a planeswalker they control. Exile the tokens at the end of combat. So with this creature out, and let's just say a Blightsteel Colossus, this is something we'll get into later with combos and synergies, you could end the game. Pretty strong card. I love the Myriad effect, especially since most, if not all, of our artifact creatures are non-legendary anyways. I thought about putting some things in here that would keep the tokens around, but it just kind of seemed to take up space and wasn't really doing much in the deck. Next up, we have Cyberman Patrol. It's 2 mana, 2/2. This is artifact creatures you control have Afflict 3. I really love this effect. Whenever a creature with Afflict 3 becomes blocked, defending player loses 3 life. So they have a choice to block the creature and lose 3 life and possibly lose their creature in the process, or, take like 12 damage from, again, a Blightsteel Colossus, or 11 damage, I believe. It puts the person defending in a bit of a situation, but also if you have this out with the other Cyberman and you're making Myriad tokens, then all of those Afflict triggers are going to go on the stack for each one of those, and the damage builds up pretty darn quickly. And obviously, you know, the big win con in this deck obviously is the
Blightsteel Colossus.
because the Secret Lair came with one. Why wouldn't you put it in the deck? It is a 12 mana, 11/11 with Trample, Infect, and Indestructible. If Blightsteel Colossus will be put into a graveyard from anywhere, reveal it and shuffle it into its owner's library. This is like our main win con for the deck. We want to try and find Blightsteel, maybe not as fast as possible, but, you know, within reason to try and close out the game. It does kind of have pseudo built-in protection unless it gets exiled, something we'll go into a little bit later. And yeah, I mean, it's a strong card. It's just, you know, I've been playing Magic for a long time, and this is the first Blightsteel that I've owned, funny enough. So, you know, just it had to go in this deck. Had to go in. And of course, everybody is familiar with this card by now, I'm sure. It's Kappa Cannoneer, 5 generic, 1 blue for an artifact creature turtle warrior. It has improvise. Your artifacts can outcast this spell. Each artifact you tap after you're done activating mana abilities pays for 1. It has ward 4. And whenever this creature or another artifact you control enters, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. It can't be blocked this turn. It's a 4/4. This bad boy gets real big real quick, and making it unblockable can be a big threat to somebody on the board. And the ward 4 is nothing to slouch at. Obviously, board wipes get around that, but you know, if somebody's trying to targeted removal of thing, they're going to have to pay up for it, and it usually sticks around on the battlefield. And next up here, we have Ovia, Automech Artisan, 3 generic, 1 green for a legendary creature human artificer. Each creature that's attacking one of your opponents has trample. So this is symmetrical. So if any other player attacks another player, their creatures get trampled too. So it's kind of a cool little, I don't want to say group huggy piece, but you know, it incentivizes people to attack other people if they can get through on some of that damage. Obviously, it's good for us because not all of our creatures have trample. We only have like, I think 2 ways in the deck to give our creatures trample or to get through with damage. So it's one of those things that is a good value piece for us to have on the board. Now, the main part, which we're going to go into in a little more depth later in this, is the activated ability. It's 1 green and tap. You may put a creature or vehicle card from your hand onto the battlefield. If you put an artifact onto the battlefield this way, put 2 +1/+1 counters on it. So we're cheating something big into play, like, oh, I don't know,
A Blightsteel Colossus.
yeah, so this is a little package we're going to get into later with cheating stuff out. Avia is one of those pieces. Next up, we have Master Transmuter. It's 3 generic and a blue for an artifact creature, human artificer. It's a 1/2, and it basically has the same effect as Ovia, just a little less good, I would say. You pay 1 blue and tap it, return an artifact you control to your hand. You may put an artifact card from your hand onto the battlefield. Again, this is one of those ways to cheat out something big because our stuff does cost so much mana. It's going to be a little bit of a struggle to get some of these bigger creatures out there, and this is a way to do it. But we'll go more in depth in a little bit later in this video with it. And next up, we have Karn Legacy Reforged. It is a 5 mana star legendary artifact creature golem. Karn Legacy Reforged power and toughness are each equal to the greatest mana value among artifacts you control. At the beginning of your upkeep, add colorless mana for each artifact you control. This mana can't be spent to cast non-artifact spells. Until end of turn, you don't lose this mana as steps and phases end. Karn is like a pseudo ramp piece for this deck, and he can also be one of those ways to trigger Aloy, because he can get bigger depending on what bigger artifact creature we have. So let's just say again,
Blightsteel Colossus is on the battlefield.
its mana value is 12, so Karn is going to be a 12/12. He will trigger Aloy for 12 Discover, and we can get pretty much anything out of our deck at that point. And then, you know, the amount of artifacts that we control, that can be entirely dependent, but I mean, you know, even if we have 3 or 4 pieces out, and it counts Karn himself, this could ramp us ahead a little bit to get something bigger out onto the battlefield as well. So that's why I really like this Karn. I did experiment around with having the old reserve list Karn in this deck for a while, but I stupidly misread how Aloy worked, and I thought it was the mana value of the artifact, not the power. So I kind of non-bowed myself with that card because he would lose 4 power, I wouldn't get the Discover trigger, and I thought it was based on the mana value, and it wasn't. So first time I played this deck, I screwed up really bad. Learning curve, you know, reading the card explains the card and all that, you guys know. So I took it out and swapped in this Karn, and it's worked out way, way, way better. So those are kind of the important creatures, and now I have another little subset of creatures that I call artifact creatures that make more creatures. And those 4 creatures are Triplicate Titan, Worm Coil Engine, Phyrexian Triniform, and Rootwire Amalgam. So Triplicate Titan is a 9-mana artifact creature golem. It's a 9/9 with flying, vigilance, and trample. That's pretty huge for this deck. But when it dies, create a 3/3 colorless golem artifact creature token with flying, a 3/3 colorless golem artifact creature token with vigilance, and a 3/3 colorless golem artifact creature token with trample. That's pretty huge. And if we have a way to, get it back from our graveyard later, which we have a couple ways of doing that. Not a ton. This is blue-green, so getting stuff out of the graveyard is a little harder. But regardless, if it dies, it's no big deal. We get a bunch of more creatures on the battlefield anyways. And of course, everybody knows Wormcoil Engine. It's 6 generic mana for an artifact creature worm. It's a 6/6 with Death Touch and Lifelink. And it's got the same thing. When it dies, create a 3/3 worm artifact creature with Death Touch and a 3/3 worm artifact creature with Lifelink. And then there's Phyrexian Triniform, which is also 9 mana like the Triplicate Titan. It's an artifact creature of Phyrexian Golem. It's a 9/9. When it dies, create 3/3 colorless Phyrexian Golem artifact creature tokens. And it has Encore for 12. You exile it from your graveyard. For each opponent, create a token copy that attacks that opponent this turn. If able, it gains haste, and then you sacrifice them at the beginning of the next end step. Activate only as a sorcery. So the first time you do this, you still get 9 power back on the board. You get 3 3/3s, but then the next time you do this, if you encore it, you get 12 more 3/3s on the battlefield. That's quite a bit to gain, and that's, they're 3/3s, but we have other things in here that care about artifacts hitting the battlefield and golems specifically. So this is a really good thing that if it dies, we can encore it, no problem. And then finally, we have Rootwire Amalgam. It's 5 generic artifact creature golem 5/5, but it has prototype, which we're usually never going to cast the prototype section of this card, so I kind of wouldn't worry about it. We can easily discover into the 5 mana of this to get the 5/5 part of it. And the thing that we really care about is this activated ability. It's 3 generic, 2 green. To sacrifice it, create an XX colorless golem artifact creature token where X is 3 times Rootwire Amalgam's power. It gains haste until end of turn, activate only as a sorcery. So you get a 15/15 on this thing. And that's if you don't get more +1/+1 counters on it, because we do have a couple ways to add counters depending on what golems or other creatures are out. But again, we're usually probably never going to cast it for the prototype. It's very, unless you just absolutely need a body early in the game, you could, but I would much rather wait for the 5 or discover into the 5 myself. And so that's the little package of creatures that make more creatures in this deck. We go kind of wide in this deck a little bit with all the little token makers we got. So now we're going to go into the next section here, which are the Discover cards. These are all cards that have the Discover mechanic. And the first one, well, you all know this one. It recently got reprinted. That is Shamil, the Inner Sun. It's 6 generic for legendary artifacts. Says spells you control can't be countered. Pretty dang good. And at the beginning of your end step, discover 5. So if we're getting a Discover trigger off our commander and then going to our end step and discovering more, that is just getting double value. We could even discover into this thing itself too, or if we can't cast it, then we could just put it into our hand until we can. Really, really good card in this deck. Yes, it is kind of a win more card, but it is my first time owning a Shamil, the Inner Sun, and if there's any deck I was going to put it in, it was this one for sure. Next up, we have Walk with the Ancestors. It's 4 generic and a green for a sorcery. Return up to 1 target permanent card from your graveyard to your hand, and then discover 4. I know this seems kind of high cost, but again, with the way we're going to be discovering into multiple things that are pretty high cost already, this card is fine. And even if you have it in like your opening hand and you're waiting till turn 5, maybe something dies in between those 5 turns and you need to get it back. Well, this is a good way to not only get that thing back, but then you get the Discover trigger. 4 is nothing. 4 is fine. There's plenty of stuff we can discover into in this deck with 4. And, it's just on theme. I know it's not like the greatest card, but again, it's on theme. And I wanted to keep this deck as on theme with that Discover as I could. Speaking of which, the next card here is Buried Treasure. It's 2 generic mana for an artifact treasure. You can sacrifice it to add 1 mana of any color, but it has pay 5, exile Buried Treasure from your graveyard, discover 5. Again, it's just another piece to discover. And again, it's on theme because, a lot of the game you are you're not necessarily looking for treasure, but you find treasure in the game. You find all these armor pieces and artifacts and stuff like that. So, It's thematic. It's really the only reason it's in the deck. The card's fine too. I've actually used it, and that Discover 5 was pretty solid. And then we have Swashbuckler's Whip. It is 1 generic mana for an artifact equipment. Equipped creature has pay 2, tap target artifact or creature, which isn't bad if you need to tap something big down. And it has pay 8, tap, discover 10. And this is a repeatable effect. This is not like you have to get rid of this equipment or anything like that. You can just pay 8 mana to discover 10 every turn if you want to. There was a game where I got to do this at least 3 times, and man, let me tell you, discovering 10 is pretty huge. I've only whiffed a couple times, but, and it's only got a equipped 1 cost as well. So it's, it's very cheap in that respect and what it does up until that point. And I think the Discover 10 is really, really huge for this piece. No brainer to put this in the deck. And next up, we have Monstrous Vortex. It's 3 generic mana and a green for an enchantment. Whenever you cast a creature spell with power 5 or greater, discover X, where X is that spell's mana value. Now, this is the cool thing about this because it cares about the mana value, not necessarily the power. So a lot of these artifacts that we are casting, they are above 5 power, but their mana value is going to be way, way more than that. I mean, just imagine if we cast again.
Blightsteel Colossus.
Its power is 5 or greater, and then we're going to get to discover 12. That's huge. Again, that can get like pretty much anything in this deck, and a lot of the creatures that we have higher than 5 powers, so this thing's going to trigger quite a bit. And even better than that, when we discover off Aloy, if we discover something that has 5 power, we get a double discover trigger off that because this will trigger off of it as well. And then next up, the 2 lands, the Hidden Cataract and the Hidden Nursery lands. I put them in here just because, again, they are on theme. It's the green one and the blue one. They do enter the battlefield tapped, but we have something for that is on theme, which we'll get to. And it's got 4 in a green and 4 in a blue. Tap it, discover 4, activate only as a sorcery. You have to sacrifice a land. I've actually done this in games. Like, it came in clutch getting that discover 4 trigger, believe it or not, and sacking lands because it had so many lands by this point in the game that it was worth it to sack both of them and see what I could get off the top. So that's why they're in the deck. They're late. They're definitely late game cards. They're not early game cards unless you're just absolutely struggling to get anything on board, which I have yet to happen. So it's not, they're not great cards, they're not great lands because they come in tapped, but they are thematic and they do work. So now let's look at some card draw in the deck. We have 5 pieces of card draw. The first one being Ancestral Vision. It's a sorcery with suspend 4, pay blue, target player draws 3 cards. So this is really to try and discover into this. Paying a blue and waiting 4 turns is also fine. Like, hands down, waiting to draw 3 cards, you probably won't need it until 4 turns, realistically. But really, I know it might seem like a feel bad to, discover 10 and then go into this Ancestral Vision, but, drawing 3 cards isn't so bad. You could also, instead of discovering into it, you could just put that card into your hand if you want to as well. I think it's a good card. I figure why not put it in this deck. And of course, we have Garrick's Uprising, 2 generic, 1 green for an enchantment. When this enchantment enters, if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, draw a card. Creatures you control have trample, which is important. We want that. And whenever a creature you control with power 4 or greater enters, draw a card. Now, obviously, we have a bunch of golems that are going to be entering as 3/3s, so this won't really trigger off that, but the main creatures that make those 3/3s are going to be bigger, and we will get to draw cards, and those things will have trample, and that is what we want out of this card. And of course, Growth Spiral, 1 green, 1 blue for an instant, draw a card. You may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. It came with Secret Lair, so of course it was going in the deck. And, just drawing a card for 2 mana is fine. Getting to put a land onto the battlefield is also fine. Why not put it in the deck? Then we have Thoughtcast, 4 generic and a blue for sorcery. It has affinity for artifacts. The spell costs 1 less to cast for each artifact you control. Draw 2 cards. Realistically, this is going to be a 1 mana draw 2 cards. I've never ever played this card where it was like any more than that. Maybe 2 mana if I'm really in a pinch, but like most of the time this is a 1 mana draw 2 cards, hands down. And then we have One with the Machine, 3 generic, 1 blue for a sorcery. Draw cards equal to the highest converted mana cost, now mana value, among artifacts you control. Well, guess what? A lot of our artifacts cost a huge amount of mana. We're talking 9, 10, 11, 12. Do you want to pay 4 mana and draw 10 cards? I know I do. So that's why this is in this deck. And let me tell you, I've gotten to draw 10 cards off this card multiple times in a game. It's pretty great. This is a huge one for this deck just because our creatures are so big. So those are all the card draw spells in this deck. Next up, we are going to talk about the ramp. You know me, when I build a green deck, I put the same green cards in there. I know people are kind of fallen off on these cards, but I don't know, man. I still use them. They work out for me. I want to have as much mana available to me as possible. We are running Cultivate, Kodama's Reach, Nature's Lore, Farseek, and Tempt with Discovery. You know what pretty much all these do. Nature's Lore and Farseek, they get the forest islands out of our deck because we are running quite a few of those. I'm not going to get too in-depth into the mana base. Really, the one I want to talk about is Tempt with Discovery. Obviously, this card has a little bit of a double-edged sword to it. It's more used in kind of group hug decks. It's 3 generic and a green for a sorcery. Tempting offer. Search your library for a land card and put it onto the battlefield. So already you can get a land. Then each opponent may search their library for a land card and put it onto the battlefield. For each opponent who searches their library this way, search your library for a land, put it into the battlefield. Then each player who searched their library this way shuffles it. So really, this is just to get our Urza lands out of the deck. Literally everybody that I've played against this deck with knows that automatically. They know what I'm going to get. They know what's in the deck. And they're like, it's funny how like I've heard people like, yeah, whatever, just get your Urza lands. And I'm like, okay, cool. And that's massive ramp for us. I've only, I think one person has said no to this card. Plus, everybody else wants to ramp too half the time. So it's very rare that I've had people say no to this. At least in my experience, it's probably the smart thing to say no, realistically. But even when I play against it, I'm like, you know what? I kind of do want to land, so I will say yes. That's just me though. So that's why this is in the deck, to get our Urza lands out, which we're going to talk about those in a minute. So that's all the ramp. You know what all those other cards do. We don't need to go too in depth with them. Next up, I want to talk about what I mentioned earlier with cheating creatures into play. Like I mentioned 2 of them earlier. That is Ovia, Automech Artisan, and the Master Transmuter. Those are 2 creatures that let us put something into the battlefield for a significant discount. 1 mana to put something onto the battlefield. That's huge. I had a game once where I had Master Transmuter onto the battlefield and nobody touched it, and I kept bouncing an Aether Vial back to my hand to get a Darksteel Colossus back onto the battlefield. And the thing that people wanted to remove, it wasn't the Transmuter. People were looking at my board and they're like, what should we get rid of? And they saw this other scary stuff. And really, the piece they should have got rid of was the Transmuter, and they did not. And so it allowed me to keep bouncing stuff that they were trying to get rid of. So when they tried to get rid of the thing that they were wanting to get rid of, I just bounced it back to my hand with the Transmuter and got something even worse out. So if you see this at the battlefield or the Ovia, you probably want to get rid of them immediately. And next up, we have Thran Temporal Gateway. It's 4 generic for a legendary artifact, and it has pay 4. You may put a historic permanent card from your hand onto the battlefield. Artifacts, legendaries, and sagas are historic. So this is a little less of a cost reducer. In theory, let's just say we play this on turn 4. It's an 8 mana investment, so we're gonna have to take technically a turn off tempo-wise to get something out into a play. But if we're playing this on turn 4, on turn 5, we're gonna cheat out. Let's just say, I don't know, a Blightsteel Colossus. You're going to be the threat pretty quickly, obviously, but cheating on a 12 mana artifact on turn 4 isn't too bad. So this was like an auto occlude in the deck. It's such an easy way to cheat out all these huge artifacts that we have. Obviously, the other good thing about this deck too is all the artifacts have enters the battlefield triggers. Not many have cast triggers. There's 1 that has a cast trigger. It's a Maelstrom Colossus. It has a Cascade trigger. So that we obviously want to cast instead of putting it onto the battlefield. But, we have things like Meteor Golem in here that like just care about hitting the battlefield to destroy something. Any of the Darksteel Colossuses, any of the bigger threats that we have, they don't have cast triggers, so we don't care about that. We just want them to get onto the battlefield, and cheating something into play for 4 mana is pretty darn huge. Another one in the deck is Court of Bounty. This is kind of a weird one. It's 2 generic, 2 green for an enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, you become the monarch, which is huge. It's kind of extra card draw. And at the beginning of your upkeep, you may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. If you were the monarch, instead, you may put a creature or land card from your hand onto the battlefield. So not only does this give us the monarch to draw extra cards, it lets us cheat something into play. Yes, it's on our upkeep, and we have to make sure that we keep the monarchy for a whole turn cycle, which is going to be hard. People are going to want to gun after it. But if you have enough threats on the board that people can't attack into you, I mean, next upkeep, we can just cheat. Oh, I don't know.
Blightsteel Colossus.
Onto the battlefield. Yeah, you could see the theme here with what I'm going with this. We're just trying to get that Blightsteel out and kill everybody with it because, it's my first one. I got to kill somebody with it eventually. Again, this is just a way to cheat something out. Yeah, it's a 4-mana investment, but the card draw is huge. And even if we aren't the Monarch, we get to put extra lands from our hand onto the battlefield, which is also good ramping into those bigger threats as well. And then finally, we have Aether Vial. It's 1 generic mana for an artifact. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may put a charge counter on Aether Vial, and it has tap. You may put a creature card with mana value equal to the number of charge counters on Aether Vial from your hand onto the battlefield. Now, I know you're looking at this card and you're thinking like, oh man, if we want to put a Blightsteel Colossus, it's going to take 12 turns to get it out, which by then we could just play it regularly. That's not why we're playing this card in this deck. The real reason this card is in this deck is because it has some synergy with Master Transmuter to bounce something, an artifact, a cheap artifact back to our hand to get something bigger and more scary out onto the battlefield. We'll go into that a little bit more, but this is one of those ways to kind of cheat something out that I talked about, whether it's through the Aether Vial itself, if you get to that many turns, or if you're bouncing it back to your hand. So those are the cheating into play aspects of the deck. Next up, we're going to talk about some lands. You know them, you love them. It's the Urza's lands. Urza's Tower, Urza's Mine, and Urza's Power Plants, and also Urza's Workshop. So, these cards ramp you pretty hard in artifact decks because the more Urza lands you have out, the more they tap for mana. And the one I want to kind of touch on real quick is Urza's Workshop. Again, this is one I misread so hard when I first played it. I thought it was a land that taps for more mana the more Urza lands you had out. It cared about that, but I misread it and it's actually Metalcraft. So it cares about artifacts being on the battlefield. So you get to add mana for each Urza land, but only if you have 3 or more artifacts. I just read it as you get to add mana as long as you control Urza lands, because again, reading the card explains the card, and sometimes I don't pay too much attention. So that was my bad. Obviously, this was, when I first built the deck, so I was trying to learn it, pilot it, figure out everything works. And I'm telling you things that I discovered while playing it. So please make sure you read this card. It is Metalcraft. It cares about artifacts, not the Urza lands, which, I mean, it cares about the Urza lands once you have it online. But regardless, huge ramp piece to get all of these out. I mean, you're going to be tapping for like, oh my gosh, almost 9 or 10 mana, probably more. I don't know the exact number. But yeah, those are the important lands in the deck, and like I mentioned, the hidden Cataract and hidden Nursery as well. So those are pretty much all of the important cards that I wanted to go over in this deck. Obviously, you can look at the full deck list in the show notes. There's a lot more little nuances and cards in this deck. I mean, some really cool creatures as well. A lot of golems, a lot of constructs, a lot of things that care about cheating things into play. So with all that out of the way, let's kind of talk about how we pilot the deck. Piloting this deck requires some setup. You obviously want to try and ramp as much as possible, get some value pieces on the battlefield and things like that. Try to be as least of a threat as possible, because once you hit that breaking point and you can have these extremely explosive turns that can turn the tide in our favor pretty quickly. The main thing that I've noticed in games is that everyone kind of blows the removal on other threats before we even get any of ours out. Keeping Aloy back until we know for sure we can get some value off her is absolutely key to this deck. Once she's able to hit the battlefield, she doesn't even need to attack. As long as you have another artifact creature that does not have summoning sickness and you can attack with it, you can get her discover trigger right off the bat in that combat phase. And just remember, it's the creature's power she cares about. The bigger, the better. We have a lot of really big creatures in this deck, so hopefully we're going to be getting some pretty explosive discover triggers. Now, like I mentioned, there are some combos and synergies in this deck, one of which I mentioned earlier is Cyberman Squadron and Blightsteel Colossus. So if you have a Cyberman Squadron on the battlefield and you have a Blightsteel Colossus on the battlefield, neither have summoning sickness, and you attack, well, you're going to make a copy of a Blightsteel Colossus for each opponent, and if they don't have any blockers or enough blockers, they're just going to die. If you have a way to make the Blightsteel unblockable, that's even better. Obviously, it's very dependent on what the board looks like. Even then, just trying to get in for as much damage as you can with it is pretty darn good, and if you can do this multiple turns in a row, it's going to be good for you. There's also Liquid Metal Torque and Aloy. If you turn Aloy into an artifact before she attacks, She doesn't say other artifact creatures, she just says artifact creatures. So if you turn her into an artifact with Liquid Metal Torque, she can trigger off of herself, get a Discover trigger of 3, which ain't so bad. That can ramp us into a lot of things. We can also use it to turn her into an artifact, bounce her back to her hand to save her if somebody's going to remove her with Master Transmuter. All kinds of little silly shenanigans with that. Liquid Metal Torque is a good card. And then, of course, there's Strionic Resonator in Aloy. I got to do this in a game where I was doubling up on her Discover trigger with the Strionic Resonator. It was amazing getting to discover 10 a couple times and just getting into some absurd creatures. I mean, it was game-changing stuff, where it's like, oh, I'm the threat. You have to kill me now. And it was very warranted. So definitely if you can get a Strionic Resonator out with her, it is amazing. And like I mentioned earlier, Aether Vial and Master Transmuter, they are a perfect combo to bounce stuff back to your hand. You just get that Aether Vial back to your hand, put something big and scary down, play that Aether Vial again for 1 mana, and just accrue value off that. I don't even really care half the time about the charge counters on it. It's nice if you can get something out that's, like 1 or 2, maybe 3 mana, if you got nothing else going on, but just letting it kind of sit there until you need it is really what it's about. So with that out of the way, let's talk about the pros and cons of the deck as well. This deck does require quite a bit of setup. As you can see, the mana value for most of this deck is pretty darn high, so brute forcing a lot of these creatures isn't going to happen until late game. We have to get one big creature on the board, let it stick there to really fully take advantage of Aloy's Discover trigger to start accruing more value. So we are playing a slower game plan than most people, and honestly sometimes that's worked to my advantage in playing. But if you start getting these big threats on the board, the focus does shift to you pretty quickly. It's kind of inevitable. But hopefully you can keep Aloy on the field or have enough creatures to kind of slow down the damage from other players. Also, we truthfully play little to no protection for Aloy. So if she does get removed, it does slow down some of the deck's tempo a bit. But being that we're in Simic, we do have a lot of ramp, and it shouldn't be too much of an issue to get her back out. Now, as much fun as the Discover trigger is, it's also 50-50. It's fun to cheat something in, and we don't have really any top deck manipulation like Sensei's Divining Top. So we're kind of at the mercy of the magic gods. I've definitely had multiple turns where I discovered into like 1 mana spells like Soul Ring and Aether Vial when it was like a Discover trigger of like 7 or 8 or whatever. And that was over several turns, and it was really rough. It's like, okay, I'm ramping, but I'm not getting anything big. And it was kind of, and I could have put the cards into my hand, but there was no point. I just wanted to get them out there. Now, the deck itself can actually be quite resilient to board wipes and removal thanks to some of our creatures being indestructible, and we are also running a Darksteel Forge, which, well, makes all of our stuff indestructible. On top of that, Blightsteel shuffles back into our deck, so we can't really get milled out either unless it gets exiled. But we do have ways to get around that, as I mentioned earlier, with a lot of the bounce synergies we have in the deck. So there we have it. Aloy can be a really fun deck. It's a very good value commander. I found the play patterns to be kind of super explosive and rewarding with this deck. I tried to keep it somewhat on theme with the feel of the video game. Like I said at the beginning, Aloy commanding this horde of mechanical creatures to do her battles, delving into caves and discovering a hidden world below. Hopefully you enjoyed this deck tech. I'd love to hear how the deck played for you if you built it. And, please be sure to like and subscribe if you like this content. It helps out a lot, especially as a new Magic creator, newish. I guess I've been doing this about a year now. It helps a lot. And I'll take suggestions if there's anything anybody wants to see. Thank you, and we'll see you on the next one.